Right, okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna skip all the way down to IMH, physical activity.
Yes, yeah, Dan's here, so he can address some of the questions that we had. And then Dan will be moving on to his other things today, so thank you, Dan, for making time for this conversation.
And this Lee part of that company, this is so much of what he did. He part of this.
I know, it would have been nice to have him here, but I think we're going back to the board with another review of it. And he was pretty clear with his notes, so unless we're planning to change a lot of what he requested, I don't think.
And I think we have to talk about that today, but the intention at the board retreat was to get guidance from the full board on what the big picture issues are that they want to tackle in policy. So if ADA or something like that rises up in the group, then we can have a larger conversation. But I don't know how much of this all goes in this policy, but that's why Dan's here.
Well, and I was, when Patty asked me to come and I was reading through, I was trying to get to the crux of what the meaning of some of the changes are. And I guess I look at it through the lens of that, any student that's in special education is a regular student first. And I think that all of our policies should be written through that lens, right? Because for all students. And I think when we start separating out and making it all, adding in special things, it seems like we're adding things in for special education students versus the IEP is what would drive any changes or exemptions, I guess, to any type of policy that we would have. And saying that, I would also, always caution IEP teams that, the IEP cannot override a law, but can, certainly gray in policy. I think we've had things around cell phones, for example, right? There had to be a policy written around that. But we've also come up with a worksheet that helps with students who have special needs to support and utilize their cell phones at different times due to medical IEP needs, anxiety, and other pieces, right? But that's IEP driven. That's a team decision. So, I don't want to exclusively say to IEP teams that you have carte blanche to override any policy, but I think it would always be the role of the LEA at the meeting to work and make sure the IEP is not completely overriding policy, but how does it work with the policy, and then seek guidance from either the administrator or the superintendent's office to find out what that would look like, because then you really get into a slippery slope on all that. So looking at some of those as far as persons playing alongside peers shall be default expectations, support the reasonable programmatic modifications, accessible spaces. To me, that feels like we're specializing it a little bit on the policy versus keeping it as a general policy for all students. They discourage routine use of segregated alternative activities in PE or recess when participation can be supported through reasonable modifications, supervision, safety based. That one again feels like I don't think we do segregation, right? I think that if we had an alternative need for a student to have something, we have APE, right? And that is IEP driven based on the student's needs. It doesn't prohibit them from participating in the regular PE class. If we needed some type of alternative activities on our playgrounds, I think that becomes a building type of look. I think, we talked about, we have, swings that are accessible. And, I think working with Kenny and his team as they're rebuilding playgrounds to look at the accessibility and, what can we add to our playgrounds to make sure there's accessibility for all students. I'm not sure how it blends into the policy, I guess is my kind of piece.
Can I ask you a question?
Mhm.
Is there any of the language that Lee is proposing that you think would be logical to add to this policy? Because I can hear that there are some concerns about some of it potentially going too far afield. Is there anything that you think we would want to consider keeping?
I guess I'm not saying either way. I'm just kind
Okay.
of voicing my opinion on ultimately as the policy board, you guys have that determination of the policies forward. I guess I'm just putting it forth as that, all of our students should be looked at through that lens, and the IEP should be the element that makes any type of modification to something of that nature. And an activity policy and recess, if you had a student with, significant behavioral challenges, there's a behavioral program put in place, and something around recess, around make it work or something like that, were put in as a part of a behavioral plan. We always want those kids to be active as well, but what does that then look like? That would be an IEP driven type of piece, and I think we get into those policy versus IEP. And that's where, I think the team would really have to, make sure like, we're not violating that policy, but we're modifying what's needed for the particular student. So,
And a couple of things that Dan and I talked about too. So we currently already have policy AC, non-discrimination, that includes the 504 ADA pieces in it, that Dan is the non-discrimination officer.
Mhm.
So a lot of these additions that are in here really fall under that. And additionally, some of the tracking and pieces like that, and Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like tracking, that happens through IEPs. You're looking to see if students are making what they need to do, and you want to see how, if a swing, for instance, was added, that would be done through the IEP process. So, and then the legal references that are in here, in addition to the ADA compliance, and policy AC, anti-discrimination, covers a lot of this. And not only state law, but also the federal laws, like the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, individual and IDEA, those kinds of different laws do already address this. So I wonder to what extent we are just adding language that is going to make this a little bit more tricky for folks to sort of
so
implement.
I understand, like, so maybe like on the legal references, there should be like policy references versus putting language in that already exists with other policies. I think it's like, feels like there's combining a couple of policies in one potentially.
Well, I agree with you that it sounds really, like some of it does sound like an IEP. But what I liked about what he added is that he didn't separate students with special needs or IEPs. And so to me, it felt like we were just working to make this policy, to ensure that this policy was inclusive. And, with regard to our general value around equity, I felt like it did a good job of that.
Like I could give an example, maybe like I had a student who had the adaptive PE in elementary school. And one thing that made it much more inclusive is that each of the kids in their classroom was pulled into that with them, like in like small groups. So they weren't sort of off by themselves. And so I thought that was a lovely way of making it seem more inclusive than just being sort of like that separate gym class. But I mean, I know I had a brief conversation with Lee about this, and I think some of his intention was around like trying to think about how we do physical activity so that you need less adaptive PE potentially. And I don't know how much of that can live in the policy, but I think that was some of his intention. Like my kid has a PE exemption now, just because the way that the regular gym classes are set up doesn't quite work, and they didn't really want it. They made a choice. They didn't want to do adaptive. Fine. So it's not really an IEP question. Do you know what I mean? Like the team was all like totally on board with the choice and how their supports would work, and that's working well. But it's more of a, what if we have access to activity that fits the needs of more kids more broadly? Is I think where Lee was going with this, but I just don't know about. the
I
language.
wonder
You know what
about,
mean?
I wonder about the granularity, because if you look at the line numbered policy on lines 4 and 5, the sentence that starts, the board recommends that students and staff participate in developmentally appropriate physical activity.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't have the numbers version, sorry.
There should be, it's right in front of that. It's in the
Oh,
packet.
see, I went online. They're not numbered online. Look
Oh, look at that.
at that, who knew?
So if you look
Sorry.
at lines 4 and 5, especially line 5 talks about developmentally appropriate. My concern is if we start putting into a policy, things like the administration shall, you're now putting additional requirements on tracking evaluation into a policy that now must be done. through the policy instead of it happening someplace else. And to Pip, to your point about the equity, I think it already exists in lines 4 and 5 about being developmentally appropriate, which is, I mean, an activity for just your regular first grader is not going to be the same as an activity for your regular seventh grader.
Right.
So I think that the statements in here are sort of broad enough to do that, and it's just daily activity. I just think that maybe some of the language might be too granular and asking for a lot of oversight that administration and or staff might not be able to implement or report on.
So can I ask the intent of this? I don't know enough about what Lee's concerns are in terms of why he doesn't feel things are, why he feels so, like this is a lot of language about in putting in access for special education to general education, recess and physical activities, gym and all that. If we, I mean, the laws have been there, the IEPs are there. What's driving Lee to feel that we need to have this? Maybe this is redundant, and there are some things. I guess what I'm wondering is, are there ways that the current practices are not working that require this additional language?
Mhm. That's my assumption for why he's put this in
I
here.
think from Lee's
I mean, my
perspective, he would say
understanding,
yes. I don't want to speak for him about that.
Well, that's what I'm curious.
So we should have it here.
Well, that's what I'm curious to know what drove him to add all this language, because is it possible for us to just go through it line by line and see what of this language? I don't know, is it, because I don't know how we want to address this, but there's a lot of extra language in here that's been added,
Mhm.
all related to more inclusionary practices. But again, and going to what you said, Dan, I assume that the practices of the district are already inclusionary, so I'm not quite sure why this has been added.
Well, and I do think that, Portsmouth has had a reputation for being very inclusionary for a long time, and that's something that's made our district really special. So, I mean, in general, I'm supportive of including that language wherever we can. But I think it might be a great idea to walk through the specific language and see if there are things that feel too difficult to uphold, or if they feel like they belong somewhere else,
Right, or if they could,
Or-
I think,
or if they do belong here.
right, or if, and honestly, from my perspective, the other concern I had was, are we putting in language that is problematic for administrators to achieve? I don't want to put in something here that make unnecessary burdens to administrators. On the other hand, I want to protect student rights. I guess that's the balance.
Right.
Mhm.
I don't want to kick the can down the road on this, but I also do wonder about, I think Lee had some very specific rationale behind the language that he's proposing. And I also wonder about to what extent we can address some of that in a slightly more like values judgment kind of a way, instead of with such like shall have recess like at every school. Like we don't even have recess at the middle school, so like we're
Right.
immediately not following.
And that's
So there's
something
little
that they're
things we
kicking
need-
around in Concord too, is
Yeah.
extending it to 8th grade. So a lot of
I found
this,
that personally,
Yeah.
but that's
I
a
know,
separate discussion.
Lisa and I just happened to be chatting yesterday about general goals for policy and other things, but this conversation about more outdoor recess time has been going on for a long time.
yeah,
And it occurred to me as we were looking at this policy again, that maybe we need to have a broader conversation about it. I had kind of accepted that we might just move this one through as it was, but if we want to keep the conversation on the table, we could expand it into that as well. So maybe it does make sense to have Lee here, and is that what you were thinking, Lisa, when you said take it down the road?
or is this the
I would love to
retreat?
have the board weigh, before we get too far down, of what do we want to focus on? Like, I'd love to have the board say, okay, like, we've been talking about homework, we've been talking about AI. Certainly recess and outdoor time has been something that's been on people's minds, attendance.
And equity.
Yep, and equity just across the
Yeah.
board. And so I feel like if we line up one or two of those as a goal for this committee over the next year, I'm all for that. I'm just worried that if we pull off too much, we won't get through any of them. You know, and it'll be my fault because I'll talk too much. But, and I guess when I look at the language, like I could see wanting to maybe consider some kind of language that addresses like, you know, when at all possible, the board wants like the, you know, physical spaces and the lesson plans to be designed with, you know, an eye towards inclusion and, you know, like that doesn't, like, I think that value statement, we would probably all be, you know, on board with. I don't know if that's the right way to word it. But like even having a student with disabilities go through, like, I don't know that this wording would have changed what my kid's experience was. Because they can't handle that it's too noisy. And that's also an accessibility issue, you know, like,
Right.
so I don't know, like, I just, like, I would like, if we're going to make the changes, to really think thoughtfully about how do we really look at the bucket of needs for all of our kids.
And that's where, you know, F was the one that really stuck out to me, right?
What was it?
F,
Oh,
you know,
Okay.
discourage use routine of segregated or alternative activities.
Yeah.
Recess. I mean, again, I think APE serves a very good purpose and gives a lot of positive activities. And Bill does an amazing job with his classes and their IEP team determinations. So to me, reading that, it's like we're calling APE segregation versus it's a service that's being provided to the students. And I guess the question comes back to, is this happening at recess, right? Like I don't know. And I think we do have students with particular needs who may not be able to, on a sensory level, interact with certain students or do certain activities. So I think that there are adults who probably help facilitate activities out there. And I think that, you know, to Steve's point, is that does that mean the principals are now going out monitoring the recess and what's going on? And why is the student over here with this adult doing this versus, you know, this is a time for them to have activities that have kind of a outside type of piece. And how would that be interpreted? Right? How does that get interpreted? Because I think the language gets left very loose in like the determination of what that means. And are we gonna end up in more conversation about what segregated looks like in PE or in recess time?
Yeah.
Well, I did go to the point that you made then, when I look at F feels more appropriate in an IEP than here.
Yeah.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
I guess I would. I mean, I don't know, Lisa, and we could kick it down the road, but the other hand, I wonder, with all that we have to do, maybe if we just go through this section by section, say this really enhances the policy, do we want to just, like, I would have no problem taking out F. And do we want to just modify this, bring it to the board, and then think, it depends on how much, I don't know how in-depth this needs to be, I'm not sure.
And so just to remind folks, this came back to us because the part that was added was that very last section about the wellness committee, with the wellness committee policy being revised, the oversight of daily physical activity is one of the jobs of the wellness committee. So this was supposed to tie to that committee as you need to monitor this. So that was why this policy came back. It was more so to assign that committee with the responsibility of oversight. for
Okay,
this.
and that's a good.
So that's why it came back. It didn't come back because there was anything wrong with anything else. It was just the addition of like that very last paragraph. The district wellness committee formed pursuant, blah, 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 that whole part.
So two thoughts about that. One is we could always make that change and continue the conversation around this. The other is one of the things we're thinking about at the retreat in terms of big picture goals is around, from a budget standpoint, what are the things that we need to think about strategically to support in district special education across the board with that long-term goal of reducing out of district. So if we realize strategically that the most important place to put some of that, so those resources is around like the physical activity and recess, then it could be part of that overall look at special ed. I'm just worried about through policy picking off like one piece
Mhm.
of the puzzle, if that makes sense. Like, how would we feel if we put this through with the one change and then continued the conversation about these other things?
Which one
Which
changed?
one change?
Like the one wellness committee change is the reason we had it back.
Okay, so going, not looking at these, but just going to the original, quote unquote, original red line.
I guess that's my question, because it feels like, I think that the spirit of what Lee's proposing is great. And also like the language would need a solid amount of wordsmithing to be effective as policy. And I guess that's my concern.
You'd rather put it through,
Without those proposals right now, and then have a look at those ideas as part of it. I mean, I'm getting ahead of the board because we haven't set that goal yet of focusing on special ed, but that doesn't feel
yeah,
like
I
a
see what you
crazy
mean.
goal.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It could be.
Because then we're talking about, this is a goal, and then if we agree as a board, it's a goal and a budget priority, then we're asking Dan, what money would you need to spend to make whatever changes you think would be making potentially things more inclusive if you had ideas about that?
Which took,
Instead
kind of
of,
takes it to G as well, because like, it's like, that's almost like, does that belong in this policy? Because that's an overall look at
Yeah.
access.
Yeah.
Right? And that, I guess I look at it from the perspectives of everything and how are we examining in the district our buildings, right? And I think Kenny spoke to that a little bit at one of the
Yeah.
meetings somewhere, overall access versus we're looking at it from that lens. And
like, can you make Jim quiet? Because that's what.
No, no, I mean,
I don't know.
if there's anything harmful about G though, I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's a valuable thing for principals to be doing or for the district to be doing.
and that's why
I feel though,
that's why I mean
like a participation
Yeah.
barrier.
just within that scope.
Yeah.
I see, okay.
And I think a participation barrier is broader than just physical activity. Because
Yes.
if I need
For sure.
something read to me,
Mhm,
because I have an issue with my eyesight,
mhm,
this is sort of sticking it just under physical activity.
mhm.
So I think, to Lisa's point about wordsmithing and, I kind of bristle in F at the word segregated because I don't see that as what's happening. I think that when we're providing alternate activities for students, we're not segregating, and that's a strong term. So I think the wordsmithing probably needs time.
Yeah.
And then on G, like, so we look at those elements, I can use the middle school as an example. We put sound panels in multiple rooms on the team
Mhm.
for, a report that we had for students, that needed that sound editing, so I think that's the overall kind of pieces that we look at. And when is it? There's the big picture of looking at a facility, and I think, Kenny has a team that does that and a committee that does that as well. And then, if the ramp at Old Harbor was getting rusty, that would be something we as a community need to look at how we fix that, replace that, fix accessibility. To, when we have an individual student's needs or a group of students' needs to have better access, what would that look like? And that's why it's like, is that in this policy or is that just an overall different policy that exists to make sure we're looking at accessibility to buildings and grounds and those types of things? If, I think if they were to change the base of playgrounds and it was not accessible for wheelchairs or walkers or things that students may need access, then we have that conversation. But that's going to also go with tiles versus carpets, different things like that. So does that start showing up in every policy or accessibility? I think our buildings were from like the 1870s, that would be different. We got some very nice buildings that are very accessible.
I think I often think about the kids who haven't been identified yet or aren't identified and it's my hope that we can find ways to be more inclusive to that population. So of course that happens outside of an IEP. And so I'm generally in support of anything that urges us to look at barriers to participation. And I agree with what you said, Patty, that it's bigger than physical activity piece.
Yeah.
But I guess there's two different ways to do it. Do we work that into every policy or do we have a broader policy that just states that as a value? Try to do that for all. Yes. We can discuss it. There's
I agree.
different ways of achieving.
I think a lot of that
Values
falls
are
in,
there.
yeah, a lot of that might fall into like non-discrimination.
Well, I was just gonna say, going back to AC, it talks about what is prohibited, and it really says you shall not prohibit against all these different areas. But then you reverse that and you say, well, that's the inclusion piece. I mean, is that adding a line into AC that talks about the board goal is inclusion of all students at all times in all activities? And then include the legal things that you have to have, like start with a belief or a value statement at the beginning of that policy, and then go into the stuff that you absolutely have to have by law.
Accessibility, inclusion, and accessibility are not quite the same thing necessarily.
True.
You know, I mean, because like there's a lot of schools where they have, especially the lower grades, like a recess code, where they're there to make sure that all the kids get scooped up who don't know how to form a group and play. And that's maybe not an IEP thing. Like that's lots of kids. And to me, that's a piece of this. It's not just what
Yeah.
are their physical challenges, but like what are their just social skills or behavior skills or whatever that we could be teaching them better.
Right.
That's a not an ADA question. Like that could be
Yeah,
good
and I
for
do-
all kids
and I
to learn
do-
that if it was. Yeah, so I don't know.
Good.
If
Yeah,
I
I think it's,
contradicted
either way, I
myself.
think it's worthy of a larger discussion personally. So I'd be okay if everyone else feels strongly about moving it through, just to get that new section in. If that, or if we want to hold it. Until we got a chance to have a bigger discussion. What's your thought on that, Patty? Like, how important is it to have that?
I mean, JLCF, I think, would be on for second final read. Wellness Committee has a lot to do already. Like I said, this just sort of assigns them that, and I think it says in JLCF, it points to this policy already. So I don't know what, having them point back at each other, how important that is.
Although we do want the wellness committee to know all the things that they're responsible for.
That's the other thing. So if that's we're gonna pass it because of this, and then we're gonna come back at the retreat and have a larger conversation, then maybe that needs to be the message at the time that we're looking at this for second read. Because we don't want the board to think that we're ignoring these things.
Not at all. But I also don't want to oversell the retreat because the policy piece is like one small piece. And it'll be what are your top two priorities for policy?
Right.
And it's either this or it isn't. You know what I mean? Like it's not gonna be 3 hours of
It is definitely one of those, we keep talking about inclusivity, right? And I look at it all the way up through to high school and kids attending prom, right? And then, how do we make it accessible? What can we do if we have that child who's medically in need? I can tell you in my past history, we've had very complex medical kids and we've had nurses there and parents and different things. And that's all about inclusivity and accessibility for those pieces. And it falls under what you do as a district versus a policy,
Yeah. celebration graduation is doing a silent video
and
with the headphones.
I guess, like I guess my concern, we start getting into, some of those, under F, how does that then touch upon, some of our athletics and, our unified teams, right? Because that would that then fall into this policy? That's a state approved, program, and they have leagues and everything else to do some of that. But that's, if you read F, like that could be considered under F in its nature, and now does Portsmouth move away from unified sports because we're including those students onto our regular teams?
But we're
versus-
hitting miss on that right now. Like in terms of the sports inclusion, like it's very much a coach decision, like whether to like let kids participate. Because there's sometimes questions like they're not going to be the starting, center fielder or whatever, but maybe they want to be part of a practice or like we some coaches are really good about that and some are not. So if we had values around that, that would be like sort of another conversation. And it's not like an ABA
That's
conversation.
definitely a different thing, but
Yeah,
I'm
totally.
talking specifically about
About
by
can we
teams,
do-
right?
Yeah,
And that the way F would read, it would almost be like we would have to
Can't do
like
unified.
really consider
Right.
unified sports where NHIA has authorized that.
Right.
And if you've ever been to one of those events, they're absolutely amazing. NHIA, I remember years ago, they did the championship at SNU right before the Division II basketball championship, and they did it in between two divisions, and the gym was filled with spectators. So,
Yeah.
so they did an amazing job, but that could be part of that as well. I guess that to your point, of like when do we stop? Because we
Right.
start putting things in, and how does it expand out and take on a whole different meaning?
Mhm.
and I think the question is elementary recess, that's a little bit different than high school unified sports in terms of what the.
Right.
parameters
I
would
was
be.
actually wondering if it made sense to separate, policy wise, separate recess from PE. Because I sort of feel like they're
Mhm.
different enough, but
Yeah.
that's gets complicated. So undoubtedly we need some more conversation about this. But I think the question is whether we move it through or we just wait. In my mind, it doesn't seem like there's too much of a downside to just tabling it for at least another 2 weeks or something. Or it would be
Well, you could go to the end of May, I think.
Mhm.
The retreat is,
May 12th.
so yeah, you could push this to the end of May for second read.
How long is the, I know the day, but how long the day, how much time is there at the retreat?
Depends on how quick we talk, but I'd say 3, 4 hours.
It's gonna be
Hopefully
white.
not.
It's gonna be like the complicated white smoke, black smoke, when you guys come to agreements.
I guess the only question I have is I don't know what the retreat entails and all that, but when you think about,
This would be perhaps a 10-minute conversation at the retreat. I don't want to oversell how long we would spend on this idea.
No, but I
Right.
think, what I mean is, I think we should discuss the sort of general
Yes.
approach and then have this come back to our policy meeting at
Yeah.
the next, right after that.
my recommendation
We'll
would be,
know.
I don't think you could ever have a 10-minute discussion on something that involves language.
No, we're
I-
not talking about doing
No,
a
wouldn't be
policy
the
in the room.
language.
The
Yeah.
question in the room would be, does the whole board think as a big picture idea that one of the themes they want to go at is in some way issues around ADA or accessibility, and then we move forward from there, however we land on that. But it's not going to be wordsmithing this policy in the room. I mean, it would just be, do we have a mandate? Because we've done, I feel like we've been really successful the years when we've said, these are the things we want to focus on. And less successful when we all get distracted in a lot of directions. Which I do to us, so I shouldn't be trying to point fingers.
I think that's reasonable. I think we'll just have a clearer direction on where to go. Plus, we could check in with Lee in the meantime.
Yep.
And let him know the sort of general concern that maybe this stuff doesn't belong in this policy. See where he falls, and then we could invite him to that meeting if we
Yeah,
feel like it'll be helpful.
that makes sense.
So we're looking at our.
The May after the 12th, whatever the policy meeting.
I don't know if I don't know if I have policy meetings in May listed on my calendar.
Their calendar's terrible.
There's nothing called.
We've got one on the 19th at 9,
And May 19th.
May 19th, so that's a week out after.
Okay, that's perfect.
Okay,
So we could move this to the 19th for discussion again.
I think that's
Love it.
what we should, okay. A little clearer, just.
is that the only
Question.
policy committee? And May 12th is retreat?
That's your regularly scheduled school board meeting, so that's already on your calendar. Right?
It's not on my personal calendar. That's what I'm asking. I'm doing my
Yes.
personal calendar. So I'm sorry, is it at 6:30 that night?
Yes.
6.
Should you swing that?
Only because we couldn't get away with 5.
Cause you don't wanna go till midnight, is that why?
I do not want to. That is correct.
All right.
Well,
All right, thank you guys.
Thanks, Dan.
Very good insight.
Kip.
All right. Thank you, Patty, for bringing Dan in, but I think it's helpful to hear.
Yeah,
That was thinking about it differently.
He lives it, so I think it's better, like we did last time with the nurses. They're living it. It's better to get the.
right, because I read that and I thought, I have no idea how this impacts us. I didn't know how it impacted, the schools and the administration of it. That's always a question for me.
Mhm.
And again, I don't know, I don't know. I feel like there's something driving Lee in wanting all this, and I don't know what, with all the other legal supports in place to make this happen, I don't know why he feels we need the additional language. So there is that question. I need to understand more about what he's thinking.
And I don't want to speak for him. I do think that just generally, there are some number of parents who are looking for changes in how we do recess broadly. And part of that is to like sort of bring in more kids who feel like it's a struggle to figure out how to participate in that for a variety of reasons. And I think, I mean, I don't want to speak for him beyond that. But like, I definitely had one of those kids who's like, I don't know what to do. So I go sit in a corner and read my book during recess, and that's a choice. They're a great reader.
But you just got in trouble because he didn't know what to do.
Well, right. And so there's a little bit of that. Those aren't necessarily IEP or ADA questions,
But they're sort of
but they're fair questions.
participation questions.
Yeah.
And
And they're-
barriers to participation.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So I
I
think
don't
looking at it more broadly might be the way to go
that makes sense.
and not getting into specifics that would be in an IEP. Oh, that's exciting. All right, so should we go back to
short discussion.
back to the beginning? That didn't go well.
Cameras.
Yeah, another short one. Yeah, that would be great.
Can I be a little short?
No, can I just make sure I'm understanding that this is a policy that is being requested by
The police, yes, because so you can see the date on this goes back to September when we found out that they are all now wearing body cameras. And right now, they're off in the schools because we have not given the two SROs that we have any kind of guidelines about what to do with them, when to turn them on. Deputy Chief Maloney gave us this language as a way for them to use body cameras in the case of a legal situation. So and if you look through it, I mean, they will stay on in sleep mode. The only time that they would go on is for criminal law, threats to safety, calls for police intervention, lawful search and seizure. So this would be like the criminal piece of this. But if the SRO is just talking to a student about a concern, it would stay off. So they would be actively turning them on only in these three situations. And then under number 3, not going on during these kinds of situations. So if the SRO is just walking into the bathroom to double check, or is there, are they fooling around? It wouldn't need to go on then. So they give a number of examples there.
My only question was how reasonable it is for them to turn it on and off. But obviously, if the chief is recommending it, I guess that's something that.
I think
That's-
that's
yeah.
practice anyway, and I don't think that they're on, just as a matter of course, for a regular, if they're just driving around, I don't think they're on all the time.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, for the reasons that these would be turned on, if you look at these 3, these are not incidents that happen very often.
No,
So really, it's going to be more of they're going to usually be off unless it's one of these 3 things. And those 3 things hopefully happen very often in our schools.
Exactly.
So it should be more of a practice of, oh my gosh, I'm being called for a criminal thing, I'm going to turn on.
I better turn it on, right?
And I think that was my question is what is sleep mode and how is it activated? Because there's some cameras that are motion activated or like, I just want to be
In talking
clear.
to Officer Thomas at the high school, there is a switch. Like
Okay.
they have to physically
That
do a
concerns me
switch.
less. because then it's an intelligent adult making a decision to activate it in the right
Not just
situation.
AI, like.
And not say one of our high school kids going, activate camera from across the.
No.
Well, no, but it's
Physically
voice, there
has
are
to
some that are voice
turn it on.
activated, so I don't wanna,
She physically
Okay.
would turn it on.
okay.
I don't know why it's called sleep mode, except maybe that it's just
It's like ready to be.
ready.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no boot up
Powered
time.
off.
And
maybe.
then what do they do with the footage?
So
This is the
let's
question.
see.
Because it could have
Yeah.
other students in it or other teachers in it, I mean. So where does it go when they're done recording?
Well, there's a piece about using a third party for storage.
But I guess I'm wondering if we want them to, I mean, you know what I mean? It's one thing if it's like there is a crime and they need it for evidence, but if they're like, there could be a crime and there's not, and then they've got recording somewhere of kids and staff, where did that go? Is I guess my question.
That's a good
I
question.
think it said it could be, well, that's the thing that I think is slightly unclear is that it's,
Like, I think I'm
you know,
looking for
it
the
leaves
delete.
that, well, that's, it leaves that up to the department. I think. So
Cause like for say choir,
just trust that.
we have to sign a billion releases just for them to record the concert.
Yep.
You know, and so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't get, I think that's entirely up to the police department. Not up to us. I mean, just by way of what is written here, but
Right.
would you like to change that?
Well, I guess I don't want to interfere with their work. And I think that the cameras can have a role when there's an investigation. I mean, it kind of can protect everybody,
Mhm.
you know, so I don't want to be reflexively opposed, but I do wonder, especially because it's kids and there could be other kids that are not the ones being investigated who are recorded, the potential for, I don't know, like the SRO to review it
Mhm.
and then delete all non-essential footage, I guess is what I'm wondering if we can add it. I want to be careful about maybe wording that in the
Do-
wrong
Do
way.
you need me to see if Deputy Chief Maloney could join us on the 21st?
Kicking at another thing, I'm sorry.
No.
But what do other people think? But I guess it's just,
important.
they probably have a way to do it that would be fine, but I would worry if it was just like an infinite storage of footage of
He probably
kids.
has these answers too, and we don't have him here, so he probably could answer these questions for us. Or if he can't be here, I could at least ask him to respond to that question
Mhm.
for us in writing.
There was more in here.
Did I just miss it? I didn't.
There's
see
the
it.
whole record maintenance part, which is
Yes.
part G, but it doesn't talk about
It doesn't talk
where it
about.
goes.
It says
Yeah.
edit, alter, erase, delete, duplicate, copy.
Which part are you looking?
So I'm looking at the record
G1.
maintenance,
Yeah, the
G
what?
one.
You want?
Well, it did say essentially it's not accessible to anyone, so that's good.
But it also says that they will not like delete. You know what I mean? So that's where I'm confused. So I assume if it's stored somewhere, then it could potentially be subject to a Records Act request.
Which would be G2.
Right, which I don't know, like I'm just always a little nervous.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question that we can ask.
I think the only thing that you need to keep in mind is you don't, this was put out, he gave us this in September. If you had an incident right now where a camera would be helpful, we are not, for any of those three situations, the longer we don't enact this policy,
Yeah.
the longer we have the potential for one of these three situations happening. I would just think that we want to move this forward as quickly as possible, because if you have one of these happen and you don't have the camera, you've lost some possible valuable information.
Yes, and I'd want it in the high school handbook before it's used.
Mhm.
Because students should at least have a minimal right to know that they're gonna be recorded in a situation, because that's not current practice.
There should
So I
be
agree with you, like I
notification
wanna
to
definitely
families.
like
Yeah,
support our SROs doing their work. But I wouldn't want the body cameras to be a thing that just suddenly happened overnight without students being notified and staff being notified of that change.
Well, what do you think about moving it to the first reading, so we at least get it on people's minds and
Yeah.
possibly get other questions from the
I
board?
think that makes sense.
And at the same time, we try to answer the
Yeah.
question, or maybe before the meeting, get the answers.
No, if we do first reading and then we send them whatever the other questions are from the board, then they can potentially address it and move forward.
Because when, if you,
Great.
you have to have 3 readings, correct? Two. Oh,
Sometimes we get 3 if we're lucky.
One of my questions would be, could we make it effective for like August? Potentially, so that students are notified and staff are notified.
You could do July 1st and
Well, as
Clarification.
Yeah.
This is the police's policy.
But is there?
This is what they're proposing for them.
so
So
will
if
police
we're-
commission be passing this and we have to send down amendments?
That was my understanding.
Is that
That's
the-
not like ours.
So
So as far as, so I,
So then we would need to liaison with the police commission around our concerns. So we should still talk about it at the board level, get everybody's questions, and then send that to the police commission if it's their policy.
what was your conversation with Zach? I mean, I don't think the intention was for us to create
No,
this policy.
No,
This is something
no.
that the
I
police.
misunderstood that.
we do need it to be a
but
policy,
we also, we could adopt
their policy.
their policy.
I think we should, because for it not to be in our policy handbook, that seems.
No, it needs to be
Yeah.
clearly,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not opposed to doing this, I think we want to be really clear, yeah.
I also, I mean, I just noticed that like, there's some lingo in here that doesn't make sense to
Yeah.
police officer types, law enforcement types, so we should, if it is gonna be our own policy, like, we should define BWCs.
Could we put this,
right.
I'm not sure if they would be able to come to our next board meeting to answer any questions about it. But I do think having a conversation at the board level in public, given what we're talking about, is a good idea.
So you want them invited to the May,
Well, I don't know if we can invite them next week, and it wouldn't be May 12th. That's the retreat, so it would be the. what?
26th?
Is that too late, though? I mean, we could certainly do a first read, but it doesn't sound like it's ours to pass, so we don't need to do the first read.
Well, you can do what you want. You just have to create one.
I think we should definitely let
Yeah.
the board read this before we do anything with it. So even if we don't call it a first read, it's a
Well,
point of information.
Did this go to the board? There was a
this has
conversation at the
never,
board.
this has
Yeah.
never gone to the board. We talked in September, this is how long ago this was, about they are wearing body cameras now across the department. We have 2 SROs. They're also wearing body cameras. Right now they are off until we get agreement with how we're going to address that. They're staying off. So Mike Maloney provided us with this being their information, how they're going to use it so that we would have an understanding of what was going to be happening. And that we need to figure out how we're going to notify families, students.
So I think we need our own policy on this, so it's really clear for staff and for students what to expect around it.
Mhm.
And I don't know how much it's exactly their wording, or we just write something short of our own that says we will, facilitate the police department policy being used in our schools.
Right, at least something that
Right.
addresses it.
Well, then you could just, if you did that, you could, this number 2 on the first page would be the most important thing for parents and children to know.
But I think people need to know about the whole policy.
Well, I think honestly, the only piece that we don't need if we were to adopt the policy is part B on training.
Yeah,
Like,
okay.
Although,
So,
frankly, I would like to know, I appreciated knowing that myself, so.
Yeah.
I don't think, as long as we're capable of keeping our policy consistent with the police policy. I don't think they're gonna change it without telling us about, anything that happens in schools, but.
we're circling back to one, we have a mirror policy of our own.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, so I'd like to.
Then I think we do first read, get the questions.
Yeah.
And have them fun.
Well, when do we want first
I
read?
mean, it's not, personally, I don't know that it's totally ready for first read, just like for instance that I mentioned, like the definitions and stuff, but I think maybe
Point of
maybe
information
BWC and SRO just need to be
defined.
defined, so then we'd be okay. We were taking out the CFS.
Do you want to just
And
go to the
CAD.
police commission and talk to them about it directly?
No, that we need to, because really our only question is what happens with the footage, right?
Right.
Oh, it does the body cam cameras down, so. Could we just add, I mean, I think my recommendation would be we do move forward from first reading. Either, in the meantime, ask that simple question about the storage. Maintenance, I mean, record maintenance. And keep moving forward, or as Lisa said, we could wait till after the first reading in case there are more questions and then ask all our questions at once.
But is it a first read if it's not our policy, or is this just a point of information that we're going to be then developing a policy from?
I think I'm nervous about taking theirs. I don't think that was the intention. As far as, but you had more conversations with Zach. I thought it was more of a,
This
you
is
guys talked about it at the school
Yeah,
board, like very briefly. We didn't do anything with it. They followed up because they want to do and want to make sure that everybody's clear that this is happening.
yep.
As far as, I don't think I would feel uncomfortable
I see.
taking their policy and saying, this is what we're gonna do for our policy, because I don't think that was the ask.
Okay, well, then maybe we should just introduce it as a point of information. And then maybe have a.
Gather
conversation with them
questions,
about
gather
that.
questions,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then, yeah,
And
I
then
would
maybe
say,
invite them to our board meeting in May, like later in the month to
Yeah.
discuss it.
Is that the police commission or just the chief?
Whoever.
so I would
Probably
say
be-
we could start with,
Mike,
yeah, I would say that we would start with Mike.
Okay.
And then if you had general questions, I actually think we could get answers to that fairly quickly.
yeah,
Okay,
My other thought is, and I just think about, we're facing these huge issues around budget. We're facing huge issues around legislation that's taking place around open enrollment. Anything we can do that, like, I look at this and honestly, I think, okay, let's get our questions. If it's mostly about how the recordings are kept, let's just get those answered. But I think we've got bigger fish to fry than putting this policy as another thing on the agenda.
This has come up before though, as an issue in the
Mhm.
community. I am absolutely not comfortable like authorizing this in our schools without some discussion publicly so that people are aware. Like, I'm not trying to slow it down, but I think even if we're not making a policy and we just put this as an information item on the agenda so that people are able to comment on it and ask their questions, that's also fine.
Yeah, well, that would work.
Why don't we see if he can come to the next policy committee meeting?
Yeah.
On May 5th, because that's quicker.
Okay.
As far as, and then that way,
Yeah.
if you have questions that you definitely want answered, as far as that will get us, I think, where we need to be. And then at that point, you can do a broader conversation, just as a point of information with the rest of the board.
But wouldn't it still be helpful
Oh.
to share this at this upcoming board meeting, just so that it's get public, because you're concerned about public exposure, and then have a follow-up and then after that?
So it needs to come to the board. If it comes to policy first, we still have time to put it at the board meeting later in May. There's plenty of time after that.
and
So,
then we'll be able to answer questions.
exactly.
Although we won't get the opportunity
Right.
to ask my questions that have come up from the public. or the
well,
board.
if we have questions on the fifth, he could come to the board on the 26th.
We can ask.
We can ask him. That's
Yeah.
yeah. Notice,
Okay.
and if he can't come, he can send somebody else. Like, it's not,
Okay,
you know,
that sounds good.
yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to,
I will reach out to Mike, I'll ask
our
him
policy meeting on the
May 5th, yep.
Okay.
And then on the 5th, we can ask him to come on the 26th to the board meeting.
Okay,
And on the 5th, we will ask him the questions that we have about this, but for now, it's just staying here.
sounds good.
A lot of things here today.
Oh, okay,
Superintendent evaluation.
and goal setting.
Goal setting, sorry.
Recommended, but it is here because it's already on our books. And so the adjustments are
The whole policy.
the whole policy.
Well, I think it's so much more comprehensive. I mean,
I actually like
I
it.
like it a lot. Personally, I think it's much clearer because it's a little silly that we had one line policy for.
The only question I had regarding this policy was the the board believes that establishing goals, well, the second line 9 through 11. The board believes that establishing annual goals and objectives will serve as a benchmark and criteria for the superintendent's annual evaluation. And I think that's great. And I think that should be the primary basis. Well, the only question I have is, what if there's something that like comes up that's not involving those goals? That's a critical reflection on the superintendent's performance. How can you, I just want to make sure that we're not limited to just the goals in that. I think that should be the primary focus, but there may be things that, I don't even know what those things would be per se. But if something came up that the board felt was really important to evaluate the superintendent and it wasn't within the superintendent's goals, could the board still include that?
How about adding the word primary before criteria?
That sounds great.
I think that works. Cause I agree with you. And I actually think I was thinking about what are the goals right now and they're not on that list.
So on line 10, it was benchmark and primary criteria.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Does that do what you're saying, thinking, Steve?
And maybe
You're the one who said that word, so I was thinking like,
Yeah, that sounds great.
that allows for us to include other criteria, but.
And do we want to change the will to may?
No,
It says further down, line 28, the board may choose not to annually evaluate and review every area listed above.
No, but I think we're leaving open the door to add other criteria is the question, right?
I think will is good because I think that should be the focus, but it just, but it doesn't, help the word, thank you for the word primary. I think
Well,
that.
you're the one who said it does. I just took it from what you were saying.
Oh. Anyway, I think that addresses my concern, because then I still think that should be the primary basis, but not the only basis.
Right, and it does say a benchmark, not the benchmark.
Right.
So
Uh-huh,
I think there's enough wiggle room.
okay.
Yeah, that
I think
addresses my
that
concern.
makes sense. Just out of curiosity, has Zach seen this?
Yes,
Yeah,
Well, I don't know, it seems like a fair question.
That's a good point.
I think so.
Because I'd hate to bring it to the board and then have him be like,
No.
this is a terrible idea.
Seen it. I'll make sure that he's.
No, that just wouldn't,
That's a fair point.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be. I mean, it seems sort of straightforward to me.
Do you
And
have
reasonable.
anything in here about when our board will set these
So
goals or?
that's a good.
Because that's
Just annually.
Do you
Do we
want to
have
say
any-
at a retreat or do we just want to leave out?
I don't know,
Which probably didn't.
but I also believe, isn't there language in his contract already that requires that evaluation by June? And
Probably because that's what was in the policy previously.
I
And I
believe
think
that June date is part of his contract. I mean, it doesn't need to live in the policy if his contract requires it, but I'm just thinking about when we go back to this in 3 years and can't remember what our process is.
Right.
Do we want to add the date in there that aligns with
putting a
that?
date in is troublesome if you were for some reason do a mid-year hire. So if you're saying June and you hire somebody in November, then you have to wait till June. You never know what's going to happen.
Because we had June
Should say by
before.
June.
It said in June. Is what we crossed out.
Are we not looking at the?
Oh, yes, you're right. It did say that.
So I think,
If it's in the contract, you're probably covered for the date, but putting in policy, you could,
like, do we need to cross out that first sentence? I guess what I'm wondering, line 4, can we keep it? Like, what's wrong with it?
I would prefer that it said by June rather than in June because
Fair,
what if we want to do it before that?
that's fair.
Or is that maybe not fair to the superintendent? I don't know.
I mean, practically speaking, it takes us until June to get our ducks in a row usually
Exactly.
anyway. I think by June is fine.
So you're putting it back, line 4, and changing in June to by June.
So,
It's a little.
Well, by
redundant.
June suggests that it'll be completed by May 30th.
where's it say May 30th?
No, I'm saying if
Oh,
you
no,
say
right.
by June,
It's not. the
that
same
would
thing.
be,
I think doing the evaluation in June each year is okay, but it's still gonna be
Okay.
by the end of June if it's not in June.
right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Otherwise, if you say by June, I'm thinking, I'm assuming May
May.
30th.
Yeah.
So then if we are gonna keep that, I would just move Portsmouth up to that line. I would say the Portsmouth, or I don't know, do we ever do that? I mean, do we need the word Portsmouth even? But, I'm just for purposes of like flow, it should say the Portsmouth School
Well-
Board will evaluate in first line and then.
yeah,
it should
But
say
you could add line
line 7.
4 right after the board in line A.
yeah, we just say the Portsmouth School Board in line 4.
He's suggesting moving line 4 to.
This is just that Portsmouth will annually evaluate the superintendent based on written criteria as established by the board.
Yeah,
After
take that
each year of
sentence.
employment in June. You just take that last
After each year.
section after each year of employment in June. So you put that right after the period under board. So it's all one
I'd
sentence.
rather have it be 2 sentences. I think it's
I
the
think
wrong
I
line.
would too.
Okay.
I want to be really
All
explicit
right,
about the
so it's
timeline.
gonna say the Portsmouth School Board will evaluate the superintendent of schools after each year of employment in June. That in itself is a lot.
What does the contract say?
Uh-oh.
Subcommittee of the board will review and evaluate the superintendent's performance annually during the month of June or such other month as may be mutually agreed upon, commencing in 2026.
So it's in the contract, you need it in the policy.
I would mirror the contract language in the policy. I think that's just good discipline.
Yeah. Thank you, Paula.
Like, I don't think we need the calendar year, but just the way that that was written in the contract would make sense.
Okay, so can we just do a recap?
Yes.
For me on this?
I was confused.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna keep that line 4, but we're gonna add Portsmouth. So it
Okay.
says the Portsmouth School Board.
Yeah.
Then that whole sentence and the end being what you just read, which was in June or some other mutually exclusive time, right?
Yeah, so when I will evaluate the superintendent of schools after each year of employment and then say, pick up the during the month of June.
Yep.
Exactly.
Okay,
Or mutually agreed upon, however the contract is got.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Okay,
Thank you. That's helpful.
that is helpful.
All right, and then we're gonna go into what line 7 says, but we're gonna strike the Portsmouth School from that line. So it just
Yep, so it's
says, I'm sorry, keep the.
Yeah.
It just says the board
Yep.
will annually evaluate superintendent, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
Okay, and then we're adding primary online.
She's still copying, hang on.
oh, no,
You're good,
I'm
we're
good.
going?
Yep,
Line
yeah,
10.
10, I'm adding primary for criteria.
Is there line 1? No, that's line 10, sorry. Okay, yeah.
Got it.
I didn't want.
And I'll make sure he sees.
Thank you.
That would be
Good.
good. That would be so embarrassing if we just run it. Like, what is this?
Well, and I don't know if Patty said this or not. You guys are caught up. So we're so proud of you. First of all.
Wow,
So
amazing.
I literally started going alphabetically as far as older policies. So this is why this was randomly chosen.
Yeah, I was curious. Okay,
Yeah, so,
that's really good news for her.
When was the last time that was true?
Until the spring
been
update
a while.
comes out in
Yeah.
June or May or
Okay.
whenever.
but that's okay though.
We're
Because
gonna
we're
water
great.
again, but that's okay.
Okay. So that
This
is
next one's really hard because it's just a title change.
So we should just reflexively disagree.
Is this the,
board review of regulations.
Right,
Oh,
administrative gets struck.
I just read that wrong. This goes for. Board review.
Well, I say something on this.
Yeah.
Hi there.
Hello.
Welcome to the party.
Oh,
This
hey.
one too.
That's what I heard. So here for a few minutes and I gotta run.
Yes, we were just talking about
Body
the,
cameras?
so, yeah, do you want
Big
to,
light cameras.
Oh.
do you want to,
You can go back.
you got my text.
just that there was questions about body cameras.
Yeah.
So just kind of city coordinator. So what are the questions and I can answer?
The primary question is, what happens to the recorded material in terms of storage and deletion, et cetera? And who decides that?
So I don't know the answer to that. So I haven't touched this in a long time. So the quick version is that PD came to us in August with a desire to come to a memorandum of understanding between ourselves and them. They do have all this spelled out in the MOU that the MOU the model MOU that they have. We started talking about this at the board level. I can't remember, and I think Lisa, you had said it was like we should have our own internal policy about this. So we stopped at that point. We were in the midst of coming to an agreement with PD on their version. And it was like, well, no, we're going to send it back to policy committee. So PD's been good, and I keep telling them we'll eventually get to it.
We're almost there. We're almost there.
And so I kind of periodically they'll come back and be like, so how's it going? And my suggestion to them has been that at some point that we would schedule and that like Mike Maloney, deputy chief, could come in, talk through this and give you guys give you more detail about how they're utilizing it, answer all the specific questions about all the things like that you'd be interested in. And then we could come to some type of judgment about what we're comfortable with that could potentially kind of wrap into our policy and have it still be in line with what their needs are to the extent to which we can agree on that. So that's where it's been left with Deputy Chief Maloney occasionally being like, how's it going?
So was it for an MOA or is it to do our own policy? Is it just for?
They originally came to us with the intent that we would have an MOU that would just speak to how we were going to interact with these things, specifically when it comes to, SROs is like the big kind of way when that happens, but also when we have, we also have officers come into buildings for things too. So that combination of stuff. Broadly, what they talked about was that they would only be turning them on broadly if there was a of a specific criminal act or investigation. But there's a lot of wiggle right inside of what that is. But I think they have a good faith kind of understanding of what that would be. But we never got further than that conversation. So
was the ask for the board to pass their policy or just for the board to authorize you to engage in this MOA with them based on those terms? Like, what's the ask?
So the ask originally was, here's our MOU. Can we agree on this and move forward? And then there was this conversation about we should have a policy.
So that language would be the MOU.
This was the
That's their.
yeah. This was their this was their kind of their I have a term for it. It's like their internal procedures. They have a different name to it, but
Yeah.
it's their internal procedures that, and this is the part that specifically
SOPs.
speaks
I
to
think it's
SRO.
Standard operating.
Standard operating procedures. Yeah. So there. Anyway, so that's the deal.
So I don't understand the deal. So
Yep.
the ask, that document and an MOU would both be in existence. And the board needs to say, yes, we support this approach to using body cameras in our schools. So we would take a vote on that.
They originally came to us with no intention of you guys having any conversation at all. Just that we were going to come to it administratively. We're going to have a conversation, come to an agreement. This is how we agree it's going to operate. And then we weren't. Then I said, "Whoa, no! I'm having the board would like to have a conversation about whether or not the board needs its own detached from you guys kind of policy." And so that's where it's been sitting.
I feel like given the history of sort of community conversation around this issue,
Yeah.
I feel like we would want to have some at least conversation at the board level where you report on that as a procedure and that the MOU is public and available for discussion.
Yep.
And then I feel like if it's gonna go into the student handbook, then we would need to, at minimum, have some sort of policy that says you will annually like update students and staff on this so that they know what to expect.
Yeah.
And then maybe clear out the effective date, because I wouldn't want it to be effective like the day before graduation or something like chaotic for kids. Like if it's for the start of the next school year, that would make sense.
Yeah, I think at this point, we're so late in the year, that would be my conversation. with
Right.
Be like, look, can we kick this off? So we'll kick off in the fall.
But I also want to just give our SROs that support of like the board has seen the plan, like as a board, we're behind this conceptually.
So are we kind of back to what we agreed on already, which was we're gonna bring this, or we'd like this to come to the board as an item of information? Or do we want to go a step further and have an actual MOU to agree to?
I think if there is an MOU, then I'd like the board to see it and bless it in some fashion.
But we also agreed, as this just said, that we feel like there should be some sort of policy in our handbook about whether it just refers back to theirs, or I would like.
No, people 100% need to know that there's the potential for this to occur, even if it's rare and under very specific circumstances. You know,
If you wrote policy, the policy would be fairly simple in that you would have this as a reference, and then the policy would focus on the board's supports that the information from this policy will be shared annually with students.
and staff
Whatever.
and
Right. Now, and the vehicle for that, I think there's a conversation because the vehicle traditionally in schools would be updated staff handbooks and updated student handbooks. And I think there's been times where I think you feel uncomfortable that that's enough,
Yeah.
communication with folks.
the whole.
I don't know the
Yeah.
vehicle. I think what will be interesting is every time we add something, if it's like, we're gonna do an annual. I don't know, it's like an annual sit down with folks to do a review of stuff. Anyway, we can talk about that. But traditionally in most school systems, it would be, here's the new handbook for this year. Make sure you review, you need to sign off on the fact that you reviewed the handbook. If you have any questions, talk to your supervisor.
Correct.
So, and with students, not dissimilar, we send home, things with kids, and that would be the same. But if we wanted to do more, then we should have, not just about this, but about anything, then we should have some additional conversation with them.
Totally fair. So where did we land?
I think it seems like we're in the same place, but but the question is, do we present this as it is, or do we ask for an actual MOU to be developed before that?
Yeah, let me talk to, I'm assuming this could go pretty quick, because they're going to.
Because they want it.
Yeah, so I can talk to them and say, hey, can we go through city legal, and can we draft up an MOU for the consideration of the board?
Yeah.
And then whether it's chief or deputy chief, or one of the captains being here, this group, and having the conversation, or it's at the full board. It might be better actually for them to be here. This is a more productive
That's where
small
we
group.
landed.
Yeah, I think as opposed, it's more showy and.
May 5th would be here.
Yeah.
With a tentative MOA, MOU.
Yep.
Followed by going to the full board on the 26th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With Mike possibly there to answer any follow-up questions, and then call it done to start on August 1st or whatever of 26.
I think what would be great is if we could preload. I want to put
Questions.
PD in the best possible
Yeah.
situation, right? So any of the questions that we've already dealt with here, we have in a written document that already goes to the board.
Yep.
And if we have an FAQ, that would be good for parents, community, whoever. The FAQ goes in the board
Yep.
packet as well, and Mike's there to now follow up on just the details of those things,
Yep.
as opposed to
Agreed.
verbally trying to go march through the FAQ.
So I'll reach out to Mike, because I've already got that on my list to talk to him.
Right.
Coming here for the 5th with a draft MOA, MOU
Yep.
that he's gone through legal with,
Mm-hmm.
that uses this language.
Yeah.
And I would like that MOA, MOU, and whatever that sort of procedure is to be in the board packet and have the
Yeah.
board like approve the MOU or MOA. Just
On the
because-
26th.
Yeah. And so I don't think it needs a million readings, like we vote up or down. Does that?
Sure.
'Cause I just think it's too much of a community issue to not
Yeah.
have it clear. We vote for it, we're supporting this, and then you're covered, the SROs are covered, and people have had another public opportunity to weigh in if they have any concerns. I
I
wouldn't want
think
this to be the
that's good.
surprise thing in September for some family that's like,
Yeah.
what do you mean this happened?
Do you think there would be some value in sharing even this document ahead of time with the board or the public even, just so by May 5th,
If
we
it's,
as the committee might have more questions to pose to.
Well, that was gonna be my
Here.
pushes as we, if, and I apologize that I got around the door in a second. But if there's questions you're already generating that can help inform the conversation with legal as we develop the MOU, send me that stuff. So
Okay.
so as PD and I both engage legal, there's things that we need. That's part of that conversation.
if those materials are in the packet for the policy committee on May 5th, and that's plenty of time for people to see it, chew on it, have their questions before it comes to the board.
But anyone will look at that.
But we can share it out, like if it's in the
Yeah, okay, that's what I'm
packet,
saying,
we
we
can
can
go out and be like,
The
we're talking about
documents
this.
in this one, so
Yeah.
it's already been shared
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
whole
But I
board.
think we should send.
But
it to
more
them,
like,
say, FYI,
actually
this
do
conversation
this.
is coming. Right, and we're gonna
Yeah.
have an MOU to vote on eventually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
So then maybe what we do is to prep for the 5th, if you can share this with the board and say, send us questions by, April, whatever. So that.
Yeah.
We can get those to Mike so that he can come here to talk about them.
As I
That's
before,
unfair.
right?
That's a good idea.
So people don't.
And I would just say, that's been setting since the 25th of September. I would just do a double check with Mike, or I can do a double check with Mike. It was just with, around whether or not that is the current form that they would want as a public document. Because they might have evolved a little bit since then. I don't know. I just want to make sure.
I'll talk.
I want to give them
I'll
the
talk to him.
one more shot at it before it's like, hey, you gave us this thing in September, by the way, I just put it out. I just put it out on the internet. Yeah, and maybe that's not what that.
Put it out there.
Oh, good. All right, great. Then never mind. Just.
I said we should still revise.
We
it.
can, I can
Like,
remove
have a
it.
newer one.
Okay.
Or
yeah,
just
but
That's fine. That's
It's
fine.
linked to the agenda, but somebody would
But-
have to go on and actually open it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably does that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, gang. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much.
And I'll catch up with you on the podium thing from last night. This is something that Karen and I do at 1 o'clock. This should help solve. So.
Wonderful.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
With 10 minutes left. Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna, approve that exciting change and see if people.
Yes. Okay. This is the hardest one we've ever done for them.
This is it.
Just-
CHP.
I don't know, just.
You're going back to body cams?
No, the CHB one.
Yes.
Just to point out, New Hampshire School Board Association has not even looked at this to try to update it since 2004.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're just changing the title.
Okay. This is actually interesting to me because it's sort of related to something we've been talking about for a while, which is like. Having updates on how procedures are carried out or how policies are implemented. And sort of having reports back to the board about that, and I just wonder if that belongs in here somewhere.
Yeah. I've wondered about this, but was reluctant to get too fiddly with the language. But I wondered a bit about a timing element. Because I feel like with a brand new policy, like with cell phones, I could see there being utility and having a report in the first year after like substantial changes are made. And then with other ones where it's like, this is just the long-standing thing that's coasting along, like
Right.
I don't want to create paperwork or like needless meetings and whatever. But I feel like it's come up many times for us
I know.
as a board that we kind of have this huge conversation, like we changed our discipline policies. How did that work? We don't know.
Yeah.
And we don't know if it's practical for the administrative team who has to enforce it. We don't know if it's having the intended impact on kids. Do you know what I mean? Like, what do you think would be like fair about frequency? Because you know what I'm saying, Patty? Like, I don't want to create a massive burden.
And it's hard because you write a procedure
Mm-hmm.
only when you need to.
Yeah.
What if there's an annual meeting with the policy committee or something? Where all the policies that were put in place, I don't know if it's policies and procedures or just policies
Yeah.
that get a review.
We develop a list of the ones that we want to report on annually.
Right, because as you said, like some of them aren't
Right.
that significant, so maybe.
It's sometimes it's situational, you know, something bubbles up and then suddenly you really need to look at this policy.
Mhm.
Like
Cause I agree with you, we don't wanna add a burden.
I don't want annual reports. Honestly, we wouldn't read an annual report of every single procedure in the entire school district. So that is wasting their time and then we wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But
But I mean, only things that have changed in that last year or something, or like a year ago, like.
yeah, like if there's been substantive changes to policies
Mhm.
and procedures in the last year, then we would get a report on like an impact report. I don't know what it would look like. Like, I don't want to be too.
Oh, but this talks
Maybe it's
about
every other year.
submitting the actual procedure to the
Yeah,
board
I
for
mean, it's a little
information.
different, it just reminded me of that, like.
Well, there's two things, right? It's seeing the procedures, which we don't always see, and I think would be helpful to see,
Mhm. So that's already in here though.
which is already in there. And then it's is it, like, how is it being enforced? Is that separate question where we don't have a lot of, and I don't know if that lives here though. That's not really what we're talking about here.
That's a separate, it's,
Isn't that getting into not our role?
Oh, no, it's 100% our role to know that our policies are being followed. And we
working.
don't. In fact,
In the way they were intended.
correct. It's not dictating the procedure, but to know how they're being followed. So like if,
I like
you know,
what you said of an impact report, like I think that's
Right.
the language.
but I don't have like really great language on this right now. Like I have no problem looking at this. for
but I
first
don't know
reading.
that it necessarily needs to be a policy. I think the board can request information about, how's that cell phone thing working out?
And not specific to cell phones, but I would say in the past, there is some history of the board making those requests and having it sort of go off into the ether and not come back. And I think there's sometimes a concern around like, what's this, like Zach likes to say grain size. Like, I think there's sometimes some concern around the grain size of the information. But maybe it doesn't have to live here.
Well, it could just be something as a policy committee that we request to,
Yeah.
or a board, as the board.
But that's not really this. This is just how
No,
honestly the
that's
understanding.
yeah.
I still would love to delete the last sentence, like that seemed weird and fishy to me. Well, isn't that, so for every other topic, they just give it to us? And then on controversial ones, we have a separate conversation about it first, like that seems weird to me. Am I reading that wrong?
No, I think what it is it's, they don't require approval by the board. But the superintendent might actually want approval, like a board vote on.
Well,
This is,
Body
we're requesting prior
Right.
board approval to share the procedure with the board, or are we requesting prior board approval of the procedure?
I think
Of
that's-
the procedure.
I'm thinking it's like the body cam thing.
So then maybe of the procedure is what we need on line 6 then, so it's clear what we're saying.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
We request board approval of.
Of the procedure.
That clarifies it.
Okay.
Okay, and we'll move my
Sorry,
question
may
to,
request,
what, sorry?
can you say that again?
You're on line 6.
On
Yeah.
line 6,
May
after
request prior board approval of the procedures, for the procedure. Procedure.
of the procedure, yeah. Just to make clear that we're not getting permission to share the procedure, it's like, I think you
Yeah,
have to.
That's a good point. Okay, and we'll move my question to some other form.
That is a good question.
Well, it's one that keeps coming up year after year.
Over and over and
So,
over.
I mention it,
Yeah,
but it's not the same. It doesn't belong here either.
I don't think we're gonna have time to go through the next one or the other two, so.
I agree, but it makes me feel a lot better that we're caught up now.
We are, yes, I forgot to ask about that. Well, but when does the spring update come? May-ish?
It varies.
But it's spring.
Definitely.
Look around,
Look,
people.
it's spring as it snows.
No.
It's snowing, so
Okay.
are we adjourned?
Yeah.
Then I can.
Well, I'm just wondering about the dress code piece and whether we, want to have anybody here for that conversation. Or whether we should address it first ourselves and then ask questions. I felt puzzled by the language kind of throughout that. Okay, well, that's good to know. But who would speak to it? I mean, are we trying to get students? Well, I really did feel like student input on it. You know what maybe we could do is just, hand a copy over to Nathan. And see if he,
For student council.
yeah, just see if he.
Great idea.
Students
We
may-
can also email
Informally.
informally student council advisors and copy him so they have it. Just
Okay.
like their
Sure.
input.
That'd be great. I would
Yeah.
love to get just a little quick student input on it. And maybe we don't need, I don't know whether people, feel like we need to have a conversation with principals.
I think if you're going to the students, you probably want to hear from the principals, the middle school. I don't think you need the elementary principals, but I think you probably.
I know Sean Donovan has some
He has big
thoughts
thoughts.
about that,
I
yeah.
think that Phil and Jen have had big thoughts.
Mhm.
So would we like to invite them to the conversation?
I feel like sharing the draft with them could be a good start.
Okay.
I feel like, is there anything that you feel like you want to share in terms of what works or doesn't work with how this is worded?
Yes.
What they say.
Okay, I think that would be great. I want to do that, Patty, or do you want?
I can do that, yep.
Okay, thank you. So if you have, I don't have contact information for the student council, but if you.
Would you do too, you know, Nathan Delaney.
Well, I do. No, but you said that.
Yeah,
Super, I mean, the.
I mean, it would be Heather
Advice.
Wheeler and Michelle Wheeler, just because I think when we email the kids, it bounces sometimes.
Yeah, that's good.
But
Okay,
if we copy them and ask them if they can maybe discuss this at any upcoming student council meeting and then just report back on any feedback they have for us. Yeah, and just leave it at that, and I can send that email. Okay.
thank you. Okay,
Interesting to know what the kids think.
I know. I think we're adjourned.
We were adjourned, okay.